So I guess the thing is, so if we talk about belting for conveyors, most often, whatever customer that we are working for has identified belts that work with their product. And so,
I'd say almost always.
almost always,
These days.
the belts are, now that doesn't mean that we don't know what a good belt to use. So if someone doesn't know what belt they need, in our memory banks we can kind of, well, these guys use this belt for this, you know, because most often the belt is already identified when we start. And really, tell them what you start drawing on a conveyor, Steve.
Well, the first thing I do is I always 3D model everything. The first thing I model is the belt.
Draw the belt.
Yep. That way, everything revolves around the belt.
Yeah.
Everything fits the belt instead of trying to make the belt fit the rest of it.
And that's key, because the belt is what you want moving, right? That's what's carrying the stuff.
Yeah.
That's what's most important, is
Yeah.
that the belt goes from here to here, whether it has to do a couple of jogs or around a corner or up, you know, elevate. You gotta build the conveyor to the belt.
So the belt's the very first step, really.
For me, that's the way I've found it works best for me, is I'll start with a belt floating in space, getting from point A to point B, and then I figure out what I have to do to
That's fascinating.
support the belt, make the belt
Support it.
run, all that. But the very first thing I do is model the belt.
Makes a lot of sense, because that's the most important thing at the end of the day. That's what has to move, and that's what has to take the product from point A to point B.
Yeah, or however you want it to get there.
Yeah, and so first off, you decide whether it's a, you know, a super drive, you know, smooth top, rubber belt, or maybe it's an Intralox, you know, chain belt. That depends on how the design goes too, which belt is used.
But again, a lot of times the customer already knows what they want
Yeah.
in terms of the what the belt really is.
Hmm.
A smooth top belt is more,
Fresh food,
yeah, it's
like a raw
used for
food.
more food contact.
So smooth top, I'm
Applications.
just assuming it's like the tabletop.
Yeah, it's like just a
and
smooth rubber.
What's become really popular are urethane belts.
Yeah, urethane. That's what I was trying to
So
think.
it's just made out of solid urethane. And
So
they're
it's
molded.
a solid piece, there's no,
Yeah,
It's molded.
it's molded.
there's no fabric. Some of them you can get with reinforcing cords in them. But typically, I mean, that's kind of for an unusual application that has a lot of load. But these urethane belts that are smooth on top, and you can cut them, and it does make a cut, but there's nothing inside that would fray or come apart.
You
So
can-
they're very popular. They're being used
And you
a
can
lot.
cut them and vulcanize them back together. You can weld them back together.
Okay, so you can customize the belt then. You just get them in,
You
you
can.
determine.
Different lengths, whatever. You can shorten them, lengthen them.
Yeah, and that's another thing. If a section gets damaged somehow, you could actually cut that section out
Put a new piece in.
and weld a new piece
Oh.
back in. Welding means it just
It's a
melts the ends and it just melts it back together.
it's a vulcanizing is what they call it.
So we talked about that before,
Mhm.
where you can actually cut it and we glue it, basically glue it, to
Mhm.
vulcanize it. And then it's as strong as it ever
Oh
was.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's strong.
So
Yeah, and sometimes-
that's becoming very, very popular.
Sometimes it's hard to find the seam
Oh, really?
after you're done.
Yeah.
You know, you gotta really look to find the joint. So that's a good process.
Kind of an old standby that is still being used quite a bit. And I like to use them too, and that's what they call a plastic modular belt. And that's like a chain. There's actual hinge pins. So the belt is made up of modular pieces of whatever width you want the conveyor to end up being. And then each piece is pinned to the next to make a flexible chain.
Oh, yeah.
And those work very well. They're plastic. There's a lot of advantages to those, except they are not particularly clean. And a lot of companies now really don't like to use them unless it's in packaging or someplace where there's no direct food contact on the belt.
So on this belt then, it acts like a chain link fence almost type thing, so it's flexible and moving.
What's nice about it is it'll flex enough to where it can go around a corner.
Oh,
So you can do a 90-degree turn and head a different direction with the same belt.
so you don't have to have different belts, like come up and then
No.
switch belts?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Another thing I'll interject too that I've found on those chain belts in the meat industry, they make the plastic metal detectable. So if a piece breaks off of the chain link and it gets into the food, it's metal detectable and it'll kick it out.
Oh.
So that keeps it safe for them.
So that's one of the downfalls of the link, is if it breaks or if a piece comes off of it or whatever, you need to be able to.
It's not very common that it would break, but
But it can't.
it can, and there's an added safety feature there that if a piece of that belt does break off, which maybe a bearing goes out and it starts rubbing and a piece breaks off and that piece gets in the food, they'll know it because all the food goes through a metal detector
Okay.
before it is goes to the final step.
But
The
they
other-
prefer to use a smooth
They do.
surface type.
Yeah, and
belt.
that's for sanitizing. Those modular plastic style belts have nooks and crannies and crevices
Yeah, that can clip
that make them
material.
kind of hard to clean. Whereas the smooth urethane belts, they're just very easy to clean.
Ready to go. So the other ones, I'm just envisioning if they have that link, they're up there with the high pressure sprayer to get down in between them.
Sure, they do. They spray the belts
Wow.
and clean them.
Yep.
So when you start with this and you have this in mind, so that means your job then is to know the dimensions of where it's going.
Mm-hmm.
So do you go and map that out for the belts? And
Yeah.
say, okay,
Yeah.
here it is, and give him measurements? Does that help?
Yeah, we'll go out and measure up. Basically, you just measure from point A to point B and whatever obstacles in the way between there, and route it however you can to get it in there. It depends on the degree of design that the company's done before we get there. Because sometimes they'll bring in engineering firms that will do a floor layout or layout of all the new conveyors and things, and that's already decided. But we can do both. So I run into a guy the other day that's needing they want to process, I guess it would be like a fresh pack potatoes, and it's a farmer wanting to get the potatoes so that they can sell them themselves, and he needs conveyors
So fresh pack means they're gonna put them in a plastic bag, whatever.
or a box,
Or a
yeah,
box,
or a bag and ship them somewhere to be sold. And he's like, "Can you guys build the conveyors?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." He asked, "I got to get someone to design them, right?" I was like, "Nope, we can do all that. We could lay the whole room out for you if you need." And it would be just like what you're talking, figuring out the process. Point A, point B, C, D, wherever, on out the door.
Yeah.
So that would decide which belts to use. And potatoes are totally different than macaroni.
Or macaroni, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the thing is the product that you're conveying decides what belt you're going to use, because it's totally different. Potatoes are totally different from what
From cartons of food.
cartons. Yeah,
Yeah.
cartons of food.
Potatoes are another challenge.
Yeah, but use a totally different belt.
A potato does.
Yeah.
I'm just assuming it would use like the link belt. That's probably where I would start if I was saying.
A lot of times it's a lugged belt, rubber.
I'd say at this point in time, you may want to differ with this a little bit, but I think the potato industry is catching up. But there's still a lot of just the old style rubber belts that have they call it a finger lace or an alligator clip lace.
Mhm.
It's just a rubber belt that's got fabric,
Yep.
some kind of a fabric that makes it strong, but it's rubber top and bottom. That's still being used a lot. But having said that, recently we've retrofitted some of those conveyors that use the old rubber belt with actually plastic modular belt. Big, heavy, thick plastic stuff that really can take a big load. And it's for a not terrible, but a difficult environment.
Mhm.
Actually running underwater with potatoes in it.
Oh,
And then it conveys the potatoes out of this water for cleaning the potatoes. And this plastic modular belt is working very well for
That's
that
interesting.
application.
'cause I've been in this area long enough, and I've been in some of these storehouses, the big, long buildings, and they're using belts. That's what I was envisioning, but those are more like out in the field when they're bringing the spuds up and stuff
Mhm.
like that.
Yeah.
So you're talking.
It's like black rubber belt.
Rubber belt.
Yeah. But that's still used a lot. But I think it's going to change. I think it's going to, as time goes on, I think the plastic modular that's really strong is going to start taking the place of that belting.
So part of the belting though is, especially in fresh, is it has to be somewhat gentle. Like, you don't want bruised
Mhm.
fresh vegetables,
Mhm.
potatoes,
Yeah.
and things. So it has to be able to move it along, but without bruising it and banging it along and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So how do you do that? How do you design that into your process? Is it just strictly the belt, or like if you're going up the grade, you don't just like straight up, you have to,
Oh, sure, you have to take into account handling it smoothly.
Yeah, I've seen, well, there's two things come to mind right away. And that is if it is a rubber belt, and you may be dropping potatoes from off the end of one conveyor onto another conveyor, where the potatoes drop, usually you want to not have any support under that belt in that spot. So it's
So it
soft.
bounces.
So the rubber can deflect.
yeah.
If it had a steel base under it, it would
bruise
hit.
every single one that hits.
Yeah. So that's one way. Another way is you might have just a piece of belting that the potatoes would hit and then roll off that onto the conveyor. So this belting
Straight
would
in.
be kind of like a chute, but it'd be real flexible,
Oh,
and it'd take a bunch of the energy out of the potatoes when they fall.
yeah.
Mhm.
So that's another way. There are a lot of, you've seen a lot of chutes that are made out of belting, so
Mhm.
they're flexible and,
And they don't have any, it's the support is the belt itself.
yeah, yeah. So it takes the energy out of the potatoes.
You
before
start
they-
all this in, that's the first part of the design.
You have to understand, you gotta start with the
Yeah.
belt. You have to identify which belt's gonna be used before you start building the
Yeah.
conveyor.
You guys are like geniuses. I mean, I would have never, I'm just looking in, I would have never considered, okay, we start with the belt. I would have started with the frame.
Mhm.
Say, this is where to put the frame here, and then I would have probably tried to move the belt around that. It would have been a nightmare.
Don't be giving any of our secrets away, because they need to have us come, we'll take care of it.
It seems like
Yeah.
our customers usually, almost always, know what they want to begin
So-
with.
So your job
This-
is not to determine the belt. Your job is to determine, this is the belt and this is where it's going.
Yeah,
Well,
and we'll build a conveyor that will use this belt. And that's why we're doing this.
Yeah.
We want to reach out to people who need conveyors built. We'll build conveyors for you, and you're gonna like them. They're good. They're good conveyors.
Yeah.
And we can recommend, you know, if they just don't know, we can certainly give them a recommendation.
Yeah.
But you do that, so that kind of brings up another area though. And that is, people have had their conveyors, the belt wears out. They need to make some modifications and they come and talk to you. Now you're in a position where you say, that old belt's really kind of.
That's an old way of doing it. They've got new ways of doing it. And we have suppliers that could come and show them 10 different belts that might work better, you know. But,
Yeah.
and we can show them 10 different belts that
And
might
there's
be
another
better.
thing too, and that is what they may already have running in the factory and what they want to stock in their
Oh yeah, that has a
parts room.
Oh, yeah.
lot to do with it.
So having been in that situation myself, you don't want a bunch of different
You don't want 10 different belts in your storage room.
types of belting. If you have something and it works, and you may have multiple versions, you know, out in the factory, different conveyors doing different things, you don't really want to be reinventing the belting every time you put in a new conveyor. You kind of want to stick to what you already
So how
have.
long does a belt typically last? Because I'm assuming the hardware around it's gonna last a lot longer than a belt.
Well, not necessarily.
They'll last a long time,
Yeah,
years.
Those urethane belts will outlast a conveyor.
Oh, really?
I think. We had one that lasted forever.
Well, yeah. I mean,
I mean,
they
they'll wear out,
don't
but
wear out very often.
no, the belts last.
We might have even talked about this before, but we've seen the urethane belt wear through stainless steel.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about that. There was a belt that one incline to line 6 freezer back when it was Heinz. That belt outlasted the plant. They closed the plant down, and that belt was still running.
Still
And,
going.
I think we demoed that and cut it up.
Well, the new buyers then ran that belt some more.
They did, and then we changed
But
it.
they didn't like it the way it didn't lay out that well for their process.
And so that belt, we ended up cutting it, and you could see a tear in Steve's eye, you know.
Well, it was my baby.
Yeah, it'd been there for years, and we threw it away. But it would still be running today if it was running, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, that was a tough belt.
yeah.
It was what, probably 4 foot wide,
I think it was 4 feet wide.
and it was
And it was
long.
smooth polyurethane
Yeah, and
belting.
that was probably 80 foot long, wasn't it?
It was long.
I mean, it was a long belt, and I mean, it just ran and ran and ran and ran.
You're not gonna wear them out.
No, it just never wore out. In fact,
No,
you know, they just keep the bearings replaced and on the rollers, and it just,
there are things can happen. They can get damaged.
Yeah.
But as far as just wearing out, not really very often.
no.
So really, so the way this starts then is they have to know point A, point B, and then they have to know really, we like this belt, it's gonna be based on their experience.
Mhm.
Whatever the plant is, whether it's, you know, meat or fresh vegetables or
And
whatever.
there's a lot of online tools to use in identifying a belt. All you got to do is know what food you're conveying, and you can get on Google, and there's a lot of helps for belting that you could identify. Oh, this would probably be a good belt for us, and all the suppliers are more than happy to send a sample. You know, they'll send you several samples to look at and try and see. One thing that's kind of a problem is if food's gonna stick to the belt.
Mhm.
So there's different options where they'll have kind of a rigidized surface, a rough surface. So like noodles, a noodle will stick to a belt and it ain't never coming off. But if there's a rough surface, so that there's only a few points touching the noodle, it'll fall right off. So just, there's different things like that you gotta consider. There's a lot of rigidized, I guess I'm calling it rigidized belts. I'm not sure the proper name, but you get what I mean.
It's a texture.
Textured surface, yeah.
Yeah.
That you may need that for your product so that it falls off. We're gonna build one that for a potato plant that's gonna have belt scrapers on it. And so as the belt comes around and drops off these wet potatoes, there'll be a scraper scraping the belts where it'll scrape it off.
I don't know what they were doing with the potatoes to cause that much dust.
Well,
I had to dust everything in there.
Yeah.
The handrails, everything.
Oh yeah. I'm sure that
What
you.
was the dust? Was
It
it
was some type of
Like
potato
flour
dust or
or-
flour or something, I don't
No,
know.
it's
powdered potato?
It's powdered
probably.
potatoes. It's
Okay.
powdered potatoes. Wait till you hit a pipe with your hard hat. Goes right down your neck.
You have mashed potatoes
Oh,
down
man.
your back all day.
You go home and you take a shower and you smell like the plant, and then you come out and the wife's made potatoes for you. You're like, oh, I'm done. I don't want any potatoes.
That's funny. So we'll wrap this up then and say, really, if they want a belt, the company probably already knows.
Sure,
But it's easy to it's easy to research. It's easy to go find out what kind of belt.
sure.
You'll help them with that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
We
sure.
can help them identify the proper belt. Real easy to use. And then, like we said, I think it's a great explanation that's the most important thing about the conveyor is the belt. And then we take it from there and build a conveyor around
So you'll be
what belt they are going to use.